James.
Oh, there we go. This meeting may involve the remote participation by members either by telephone or other electronic means. Due to the local public health emergency, novel coronavirus pandemic, pursuant to the provisions of Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021. I never say COVID. I just always say COVID. Okay, well, hi everyone. I'm Bree, the new subcommittee chair. I'm super new to this, so I apologize ahead of time for any inconsistencies, especially since Alyssa was such a pro at it. Yeah, let's see. I guess we don't have to do an official roll call. So that's cool. And then I guess just to introduce myself a little bit more. So Bree Woodcraft, she, her. I used to work at Darrow Bike Racks for like nearly 7 years and was laid off in January of last year. So I've worked with a handful of folks on the BAC. I'm super passionate about biking. I currently have 10 bicycles, but they're all for different things, except one. I have 2 road bikes. And yeah, so I just really love biking in Minneapolis, and I went to the University of Minnesota as an undergrad, and I hadn't owned a car since like 2.5 years ago. So I mainly biked around the city to get around, and some transit and walking as well. So yeah, I'm really excited to be a part of this subcommittee of the BAC overall. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or want to chat. Yeah, my email is now on the website I saw, so there you go. Heather, are you there?
I am.
Yeah, I want to do a little
Your evening? I can't tell. Time is a funny thing these days. Well, I feel a little bit strange introducing my small bike fleet now that amounts to only 5. I have apparently a lot of room to grow. I only have a little bit of overlap in there. Turns out that you need a winter bike in Minnesota. Wow. And then you need more than one because winter is long and bikes are fun. But my name is Heather Gillick. I'm at the Minneapolis Health Department and excited to be in this space. I also ride said bikes all over the city and have for some time. I've been here in Minneapolis for just 2 years, using my bike as a primary mode of transportation. I did manage to get out a little bit on my bicycle today, which was fantastic. But I'm excited to be in this space, both from a public health perspective and from the perspective of a resident of Minneapolis here. So I will turn it back over to you, Bree. And just full disclosure, I do have to step out and back into this meeting briefly to go give a vaccination presentation here in a few minutes. So I'll let you know.
Thanks. Okay, well, Chris, you have an agenda, right?
Yeah, so we've got the agenda. Ethan is first up with the street design guide, and we can just jump right in.
Thanks.
So Ethan, if you're on, feel free to take the reins.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's great to see this such a great crew. Welcome to the new members or the newer members of the BAC. It's great to see you and see people that I've interacted with for many years. So hi, Bree, and others. I'm going to share my screen here and give a presentation on why am I not seeing the right thing here? So, okay. On the street design guide. So I'm going to do a slideshow here. Okay, just a second. Just want to make sure I can see anything here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so you should be seeing this now. Let me know if you're not. So what is the street design guide? I visited the committee, for those who were on the committee back in, I believe, September, and gave an introductory presentation to the street design guide. And so coming back now that this is published, to share more details about it. This is so it's available on the website. You can see here, sdg.minneapolismn.gov. This guide informs the planning and design of all future street projects in the city. So this includes reconstruction projects, more retrofit projects that the city is doing. Also, what the cities has to say about county and MnDOT project, as well as private development and utility work. This is really focused on what you all see, kind of 0 to 30% design, we call it, really up to like a layout of a street. So it's not like getting into all the details of engineering. It's really focused more on the street design and planning side of things. I want to note, from a technical perspective, this is guidance. It's recommendations to help inform our internal technical work, but it's not standard in the same way that some other things we have to follow are standard or requirements. We will be updating this kind of regularly going forward. We'll be adding to it. We'll talk about this a little bit at the end as well. So this guide comes out of it's really an implementation guide to help support adopted city policy. So this is comes out of the Transportation Action Plan directly, but a lot of other city policies help inform this. Overall, what we see is, like, with the street design guide and these city policies, we're looking to achieve benefits for people walking, biking, and taking transit, which are clearly priorities for the city. Safety, narrower streets, traffic calming, other things like that related to our Vision Zero work, et cetera. Providing more space for greening, as well as street trees and green stormwater infrastructure. And then making sure that we're providing equitable access across the city. So the bicycle, the name of this, the title on this slide is incorrect, but the content is correct. This is the BAC position from October. The PAC had a position as well. Just generally here, you're supporting the BAC supported many of the things. There was some speaking to maybe a desire for fewer 11-foot lanes, which I'll talk about a little bit further here, and then how we're clearly clearly communicating advancing complete streets policy, prioritizing walking, biking, and transit. So I'll try to touch on those things. We've definitely tried to reflect that within the guide. So I'll get to those details. Just wanted to reflect what you all said. So I'm now gonna stop sharing this, and I'm gonna actually walk through a few things on the website itself before going through a few of the more recent changes. If you'd like, you can also, you can either just watch me, which is fine, or if you prefer, you can log in yourself, I guess. So hopefully you're seeing this is not the right thing. Okay. All right. Are you seeing the Street Design Guide website now? I'm confused now.
Yeah, we're seeing the.
Okay, cool, website. Cool. So this is the homepage of the guide. I do want to note, just first of all, this is a very technical document. We tried to make this user-friendly as well, and it's really targeted for planners, engineers, or consultants, but also for members like yourself who are informing our process. So hopefully I can get you started in this, but it is quite technical. So there's for kind of early users, I recommend this how to use the guide starting point, which will give you some basic information about how the guide is structured, some of the things I already talked about and what its purpose is, and some places you can kind of start. So within this, you'll see that the guide is broken down into kind of 2 sections. There's guidance around what we call different street types. So every street in the city is assigned a street type based on like its context and its its functions and stuff like that. And then from that, we have guidance to help with thinking about, especially like if it were being reconstructed. We also, in addition, have a lot more detailed guidance in different parts of the street. So on sidewalks, everything from sidewalks to intersections and different parts, and bikeways, of course. So that's just sort of the basic how the guide is structured. You'll see within this that we have, so I mentioned the different street types. We have this interactive map that Chris put together. Nice job, Chris. Which is, I think people will really, if you like this kind of stuff, you'll probably enjoy this map. This map, every street in the city, it's assigned a street type, but you can also click on an individual street. So let's say, there's a public meeting tonight about Hennepin Avenue in Uptown. So you can click on a section of Hennepin Avenue and you can see more information about Hennepin Avenue. So when we've shared, like, is it on the all ages and abilities bikeway network? Yes, it's listed as a near-term low-stress bikeway. So from a planning perspective, we're trying to get a bikeway in here. So that would be, and other things that help inform the planning and design of the street. So this is something you might want to play around with. And then the search feature, you can definitely search for different things. Just note that this is sort of, it's going to come up chronologically. So over in the menu here, you can then see how different sections of the guide are broken down and kind of expand different things. You can see the bike within bikeways. We have like a bunch of, you can just click on bikeways and go there, but you can also see that there's, you're looking for information about how do we do shared use paths or advisory bike lanes or something. You can find that in here. And then in intersections as well. And I'll dig in a little bit more on some of the bikeways details in a bit, but intersections, there's a lot here in bikeway intersection design as well. So lots to look into. I just wanted to give you a basic introduction to the site. I'm going to actually go back to my presentation now and go through a few, why my thing is beeping at me, a few additional details, okay, about some content highlights. And I know I'm going through a lot of information. If you have a question, you can interrupt at any point, but they'll also have time at the end. So still trying to make sure I can see you in case you do something. Okay, there we go. Okay, so some highlights. So as I had talked about, some of these things are things that I shared when I presented previously in September, but I'm trying to provide additional details for you now that it's sort of finalized. So part of the thing we're looking at within the guidance is to generally provide more flexibility so that we can maintain key city goals. So one of the things we're going to talk about in a little bit, we know overall we're trying to support protected bike lanes. This is kind of a good example of how we're trying to provide more flexibility. So at times we have not installed a protected bike lane because of some pinch points. And I think overall what we're saying with this guide and reflecting clear policy guidance and the transportation action plan is that we need more flexibility to work out those challenging spots rather than just say, okay, we can't do a protected bike lane. And so you can kind of see how that ends up being reflected here in details. So for example, this is a constrained cross section, and the way that we're kind of balancing that is providing flexibility to implement a two-way protected bike lane rather than just one lane in each direction. Providing flexibility in widths on the bikeway and the sidewalk, other elements, lane widths, even like gutter pan widths. Like we're trying to maximize flexibility across the board. Every different thing is giving within the recognition that, of our modal priority and what we're trying to, we want to get that protected bike lane in there. We want to maintain a good walkable environment. And so those things all coming together. So just a note on some of that. We are narrowing some lane widths. There's a whole section on that. Within that, you'll see that generally 10-foot lanes are recommended. And then we do have a few places where we recognize that 11-foot lanes may be appropriate. But they are going to be the exception, not the rule, for sure. And so within that, I think we struck a good balance that sort of reflects that there are times that 11-foot lane where you have a lot of bus traffic or a lot of heavy, semi-truck traffic, that kind of thing may be appropriate. But it's not like every street with buses on it are going to be 11-foot lane. No, that shouldn't be how it is. We've also looked to narrow it. So if the bus lane is adjacent to the street, I'm sharing a little more on this because you commented on this in particular. If a bus lane is adjacent to a curb and has a adjacent gutter pan, then that should be a 10-foot lane. So that's the type of thing that we've further narrowed up some things here. We've also narrowed widths for urban neighborhood street, these kind of quiet residential streets a bit as well. We're directing people to right size the designers to right size the amount of parking and to support more greening and other elements in the street. So you can see that like there should be more streets with parking on just one side. There should be more streets where we have curb extensions where we're providing space for trees, so that we have a bunch of guidance on this. We have guidance being clear about how we should be designing the street to encourage slower speeds in line with our new speed limits and to support safety. And this also will support bikeability as well and walkability. We are we're making several changes related to raised crossings, which we don't have very many of these in the city. For those who have been around a while, you may recall there was a lot of conversation trying to get raised crossings along the 26th Avenue North Greenway in North Minneapolis. In the end, we did install quite a few at a number of intersections, but if you see them today, they're sort of underwhelming, I would say. And that's because the design speed is such that as a driver, you don't really notice it that much. It's kind of a quality of life improvement for people walking and biking, but it doesn't really slow traffic that much. But we're really trying to make these more like a speed hump where you also have a crossing. And we're trying to have these be used much more commonly. So that's something that I think will be of interest to folks here. And you can see details on that in the guide as well. So I'm going to dive into some bike features now, and I know I'm going through a lot of information. I think I'm just going to plow ahead but interrupt me along the way, and then we'll leave time for questions. So for bikeways in particular, so we've added some details on facility types, bikeway facility types to it for a street retrofit project versus a street reconstruction project. And I am going to pause just for a second to just recognize my colleague Luke Hansen, who couldn't be here today because he's on vacation. But Luke put together all the bikeway specific sections and did really tremendous work. And so at some point, I'm sure you'll meet Luke, but thank him if you see him for the street design guide bikeway work. So I just want to give him that plug. So you can see within this is that we're reconstruction projects should implement either a shared use path or trail or sidewalk level protected bike lanes or neighborhood greenways. We should not be, we recommend against installing unprotected bike lanes on street reconstruction projects. And so you see that in this guidance very clearly. In-street bike lanes unprotected can still be used, but those would be more in retrofit situations, where we're not moving around curb lines. So we've also added some guidance about around intersection design treatments, which I'm going to show again on the website a little bit, and then some things around bus stops and bikeways. So a lot of details on some of the things, and I want to note that we've really tried to reflect a lot of the work that this committee has done with staff, and that, and we've been working with PAC and the MACAPOD, the advisory committee on people with disabilities, and really how do we bring together biking and walking interactions, right? And bus stops and those other things when we're having sidewalk over protected bike lanes. So we've really tried to bring all of that best thinking and then show it in the guide so it's clear about what we're doing and is our recommended practice. So I'll show that in a second here. One thing before I hop over there is just wanted to note that we do have a lot of details about turning vehicles and how tight curb radii should be and stuff like that. I know that's an interest of some folks who want to see those things slower, and we do as well. And so we have a lot of detail on that as well. So I'm going to pause again and go back to the website. Let's see if I can do this better than last time. All right. Okay, so I'm pretty confident you're seeing the website. And so I'm going to highlight a couple additional things that you'll see here. So we got lots, but there's so much detail in the bike race section. I look forward to seeing or just hearing as you all start reviewing. So this is for delineator protected bike lane. So it's just a random topic here, but it gives gives you an introduction and kind of how we have things laid out. So the basic introduction, what are we talking about with delineator protected bike lanes? We have some dimensions here about the different widths. You can see here we have constrained minimum widths, preferred widths, maximum widths, again, trying to provide flexibility within reason, but also trying to provide limits to that. And then there's a lot of technical detail here. And then we have some graphics about what does this look like. And then a lot of design considerations. So, and this helps inform details and projects. So what I would say within this is, like, if you're, feel free if you see something that you don't think is aligned with the street design guide that comes forward a project, hopefully we have caught that at the staff level. But I think it's also, this can be a really good resource to point it back at us if you want to, which that probably wouldn't be the first time, I know. So we appreciate the role that you all play in holding us accountable and continuing to push things forward. So this guide will hopefully have information that's will be helpful for that. We've also added additional details here around neighborhood greenways, which we know is a topic of a lot of interest and conversation. So within that, you'll see a general just introduction to neighborhood greenways. We have two types of neighborhood greenways. You're probably fairly familiar with bicycle boulevards, which we have quite a bit in the city. And we've, so we kind of document just standard practice on bike boulevards, but you're probably also aware about conversation around, say, the North Side Greenway, other potential greenways. And we've really tried to put down some details about potential implementation, both in more of a kind of a proactive, lower cost way, and then in a full reconstruction sort of way. So we have a lot of detail here. There are different types of ways that this could look, with some limited motor vehicle access, where you're taking, in a retrofit situation, you're taking a street that has, a typical local residential street, which we call an urban neighborhood street, and then you convert it into a one-way street, parking on one side, and a protected bike lane. And this would be the retrofit way to implement a neighborhood greenway, with removing parking on one side and basically providing the space. So we really show what that looks like. We have a lot of some good basic guidance for that. We also have then, like, if you were going to be reconstructing a street like that, just a typical cross section of what that might look like. And then we also have the option of no adjacent motor vehicle access. So we know overall that in greenway planning that there's going to be kind of a combination of different, kind of block to block. Some blocks might have partial access, some might be more like a bike boulevard, some might be a full, a greenway with no adjacent access. So we tried to just show what all of those could look like, and then have some key design things within that to make sure it will work well for walking and biking, also for emergency vehicle access and other things like that. So we added that in here, and you can take a look at that. This is in 3.4i. So I'm also going to just hop over to the bikeway intersections design area. And so some of this stuff, we tried to add a lot of detail about just guiding folks. I think we hear a lot from this committee and others through engagement is we still have to do better at intersections and protected bike lanes. Like, we know it's not enough to just add the protection mid-block and then you have a mixing zone at an intersection. Now you're sharing with a right turn vehicle and you're stuck in the exhaust and feeling uncomfortable again at every intersection. And so we've really looked at technical details around that using existing recent projects that have gone through this committee, like the Whittier-Lyndale Bikeway project, where we really had a lot of intentionality to how can we use protected intersections in a retrofit situation. And then we also have examples like Hennepin Avenue downtown and 4th Street downtown with how do we handle protected intersections in a reconstruction situation. So we've really tried to just document a lot of that to really clearly define some of the key elements. And this is partly based on national research as well as like our local work here on all the work that you all have been helping with for many years. And so we have, like graphics here for, what does this look like and the different elements here, and, key things like the driver yield zone. This is like the forward queuing area for pedestrians, just how different interactions, bend out bike lane design. And, we really know the benefits of that. And so we're really just documenting that and saying that that's sort of our standard. And here's how all these things come together. And so that's, you can see that also some more, and this is a retrofit example, but also with a two-way. Just how things come together, how you can get to these slow turn wedges, as we call them here, to really tighten up the curb radii, slow vehicle movements across the bikeway. And we have information about signal phasing, all that kind of stuff to help and inform this. But so that, we're really moving towards protected bikeways being as protected as possible at the intersection as well. And it should be yielding both comfort benefits for biking, but also safety benefits for both people walking and biking. So, so those are just some of the things I wanted to highlight and give you a basic introduction. That's a ton of information, I realize, only really scratching the surface here. But I'm gonna now stop sharing, and so you can see everybody, and I'm available to answer questions. Oh, I guess I should also talk about just some steps going forward. So I mentioned earlier that this is a living document. So we will be making additions to this guide as we have new information. So we're actually going to be working on a few things coming up. We're working on neighborhood traffic calming procedures. Our traffic staff are. We're working on more details around quick build safety improvements and more additional details about different intersection treatments. So those are examples of things that we'll be adding to the guide as we have ready. We also will be updating the guide, the complete streets policy is going to be updated at some point here. We will update the guide to reflect that. And then potentially in the future, we'll update the guide if best practices evolve, other things like that. So we want to keep, this will be a living document. I think throughout that we'll be making sure that you all are plugged in as updates are made through the process. And then there will be times where we're trying to work something out where we're going to really engage further with the committee as well. So just want to note that going forward. So. Hi, Robin.
Hi, Ethan. This looks really great. Yeah, it's impressive stuff. I think it's going to be very, very helpful. I just wanted to mention to folks that it's also coming to the Transportation Public Works Committee of the Council tomorrow. So if folks want to see that, I'm just putting that link in the chat. And my one question that I've got is, to what extent do we think that this guidance might also be accepted by, be followed by folks like Hennepin County, MnDOT, other people who touch our streets?
Very good question. So, this is as we say clearly in the guide, this is intended to inform how the city comments on our agency partner projects. And we also know that our agency partners are not 100% aligned with us on some things like lane widths, as an example. Two-way protected bike lanes might be another example, where, you know, we continue to evolve kind of based on what we've heard and seen and the constraints that we have. So our intention is to bring these and then continue to show these designs working well in an urban context, and continue to support our partners on having good designs and hopefully seeing that the flexibility can work in an urban environment well. So I will note that there are also a few things in here that are not where we note that it's not 100% aligned with the state aid standards, for example, which are put down and we have to follow for the for state aid streets that receive state funding. And so, you know, one of the actions in the Transportation Action Plan reflects that ongoing work with agency partners on things like standards and other things will have to happen. And so that's not going to just happen overnight, but we do hope that this, we believe a lot in this guidance, and we hope that it will be helpful for our agency partners as well.
That's helpful, thanks.
Yeah. Hi, Alyssa. Oh, maybe
This is muted. If
Thank you.
I was like, was it a mistake in hand? I didn't know.
No, I was just muted. I had first time today. Had to happen sometime. Yeah, totally agree with Robin. Thank you so much. A lot of really great stuff in here. Really excited to see the minimization of those 11-foot lanes like we commented on, and you know, just even through your quick clicking around, saw a lot of reference to our complete streets policy. So I think that's really, really exciting, and I appreciate you bringing that specifically back. I guess I have two questions. One, if there's any, as the streets are being redesigned, I guess one thing I'm curious about is signal timing, and how that, obviously, like that is not exactly street design, but it obviously impacts the experience of people using these new facilities or improved facilities that you all will be building. So I guess I'm curious about how that fits relative to some of the goals in the Transportation Action Plan. And then also just wanted to get some clarity from you. It seems like really the type of street design that you referenced as like not having room for cars is that neighborhood greenways, and I just wanted to be clear on that. I guess there's no other guidance that would indicate to folks as they are designing a street that like there's no room for cars on this street.
Sure. So good questions. Let me start with the signal question. The street design guide does not go into signal timing. That's kind of beyond the purpose of the street design guide. We do have in the Transportation Action Plan several actions that relate to signal timing and working to adjust signals to better reflect our complete streets policy. And so that is, I mean, you've seen some of that. We've already implemented some of those things through COVID related changes, for example, changing almost all signals to being you don't have to push a button to get a walk sign or a green light, just as an example. But that work will, I don't know the exact timeline, but there will be additional work coming on that. We do hope to have a more comprehensive kind of update to some signal timing pieces. We did make some changes to signal timing for implementation of speed limits. So we had a lot of changes actually had to be made there. To really kind of slow things down to reflect the new speed limits and some other things that are kind of required of us related to that as well. But we will be coming back with further actions on that, but I don't know the exact timeline. For car-free streets, yes, the street design guide is not, it follows adopted city policy. So the street design guide isn't the place where we introduce like a bunch of new car-free streets that aren't already identified as potential in the transportation action plan. So we are, the street types that we've identified and other things are in line with the adopted policy in Minneapolis 2040 and the transportation action plan. And so that does within it, transportation action plan lays out neighborhood greenways as a strategy and actions around that. And those are focused on those urban neighborhood streets. And so that's what's reflected in the street design guide.
Great. Thank you, Ethan. I appreciate that.
Hello. Yes. Philip.
Yeah. Hi, Ethan.
Hello.
So I think it's sort of a basic question that I don't totally understand about terms. So gutter pan width, MnDOT reaction zone width, MnDOT state aid standards interacting with city streets that use state aid money. What are the sort of limitations, requirements in this cluster of what's less clear to me?
Fair enough. There's a lot in here. So there are a ton of details within here. We do have a section on curbs in the guide. So if you're interested in curbs, 3.3b. Okay. So there's just basic how wide is a curb and some of those things. You'll see within as you dig in on some things, especially the street type guidance. We are, I mentioned flexibility in that space. So maybe I should pull up a picture. So let me share my screen here. Okay. So here's the curb section. It's a little hard to understand here, so I'm going to kind of use this street a bit. And actually, this isn't the greatest street, but the gutter pan is basically the seam. It's typically concrete, and so if you had an asphalt road, it would be you can kind of see more of this edging here. Sure. The gutter pan serves a function of moving stormwater, and so that's its primary function. We don't really want, you can have people park there, but you don't really want people biking there. You don't want people driving there. And so we generally that standard is 2 feet wide. That is also reflected as the standard for kind of what is called curb reaction distance by the state aid standards. It's basically that gutter. But we do recognize that designers may consider a 1 foot gutter pan in some constrained situations. And so that is reflected in the guide. We push to provide more flexibility. So defining some of those terms there's a lot of details like that in the guide.
Okay, that helps. Great, thanks.
I think Dan. Yeah, hi, Dan.
Hi there. So I have just a couple questions. The first, I think, is pretty quick. This is sitting outside of the transportation action plan at the moment, but will be put into it once it gets approved.
So this was an action, like a strategy and an action in the transportation action plan was to create and finalize the street design guide. So this is implementing an action in the adopted transportation action plan. It's sort of similar. Actually, our previous Access Minneapolis, we had a street design or a street and sidewalk design guidelines. Those similarly are like implementation of the Access Minneapolis plan. And neither document is fully adopted by the city council. What we're doing with the Transportation and Public Works Committee tomorrow, as Robin mentioned, is a receive and file of a summary of the guide. But it's not formally adopted because it's at a level of implementation detail beyond kind of the adopted policy, if that makes sense. So this will stay as a separate document from the Transportation Action Plan. It's its own website. There's obviously a lot of connection.
And is this is it okay to share this publicly now?
Oh yes, yep. Here it is. This is being recorded. Hi everyone watching at home.
And my last question is, you showed an example of a raised crosswalk with zebra markings on it. Recently we had the Bryant Avenue project come before the committee. and it was talked about zebra crossings along the trail. And Liz had mentioned that they're not sure if they can do raised crosswalks there, whether it's because of water control. I'm not sure what, but if it's not a raised crosswalk, it can't have zebra crossing according to city policy. And I was wondering if this addresses this, because basically that condemns 26th Avenue North from ever having any better protection at intersections. It affects the grand rounds around the whole northern half of the Twin Cities or Minneapolis, and it affects 18th Avenue in my ward. And it would be nice to make improvements to those intersections, even though the chance of getting raised crosswalks, you know, is highly unlikely in the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah, so a couple things here. So we are, this street design guide definitely does greatly expand the use of raised crossings. And they will be, standard. They are standard for protected bike lanes across quieter streets. So along Bryan Avenue, what we would be trying to do is get them in anywhere that you have a quieter street that's crossing the bikeway. But there are times when we saw this with 26th Avenue North, like there are sometimes drainage limitations that make it hard. And those are, there are sometimes ways that we can get around those. And then there are sometimes legitimate times when we just can't make it work. And so I know I've been an advocate where I was, for folks who were around, we were pushing for raised crossings on 26th Avenue North, and we were like, we're not buying what you're selling us when you can't do them. But there are legitimately times when we can't. But we're really trying to push to limit those when we can't. And then I think as we go in the future, we are looking for, this is an area where I mentioned that we're looking for more quick build safety improvements. And we're exploring as part of that potential for raised, quicker, kind of retrofit versions of raised crossings. That may take us a little bit longer here to sort out, but that's definitely on our radar. And then I would just also note that currently the state aid standards limit our ability to install raised crossings across state aid streets. So across busier streets, we can't have raised crossings. That is something that I think we are interested in when we talk about, supporting a design speed of 25 miles an hour on our city state aid streets. We need to be able to have things like raised crossings or speed humps. So that could be something that we're working towards. It is something we are working towards, and then hopefully in the future we'd be able to add more details on that to the street design guide.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ethan. Well, we're almost hitting an hour into the meeting, so yeah. I like your background, Ethan. Yay, open streets.
Yes, and you see my house and Lake Street. We'll all be together again having fun. So, so thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, now on to the annual report by Alyssa.
Hey everybody, I've been avoiding staying on video because I desperately need a haircut. So I'm here to give a brief overview of the presentation that happens to the Transportation Public Works Committee every year. So this is just verbal, there's no screen sharing. Mandated in the Bicycle Advisory Committee bylaws and also the enabling resolution that formed our committee is the fact that we as a committee need to have either the vice chair or the chair go forward in front of the Transportation and Public Works Committee once a year and basically give some sort of presentation or update on our work. So that will be happening at the very end of the month. It'll be on March 31st it's a Wednesday at 1:30 in the afternoon. If that is an accessible time for you, you're all encouraged and welcome to attend. I will be giving the presentation this year in collaboration with Abigail Johnson, who is the chair of the Pedestrian Advisory Committee. The BAC and PAC both used to give separate presentations, and in recent years have done our presentations together because we have a lot of alignment in the way that we think about the world, and it is I think a much stronger presentation when we come together jointly and say, you know, here are the things that matter to us. Here's what our hopes and dreams are for the future of Minneapolis. So, and when we met in person, we would often go out for like lunch or something afterward to celebrate and talk about how it went. Obviously, we won't be doing that this year because it's a few short weeks from now. But I think it's a really great opportunity to not just share with members of the council what we are thinking about within our work, but also to you know, we don't as a group get a lot of FaceTime with council directly, and so it's really great. And folks do notice how many of our committee members show up in these to the conversation. And obviously, it won't have the same impact as when we were all meeting in person and would show up in council chambers. But so that's sort of the logistics of what will be happening on March 31st. And then I kind of wanted to give folks just a super high level overview of how the presentation is taking shape thus far. So Abigail and I have had a number of conversations, and then also met with Matthew as staff, Chris as staff, to kind of talk about what do we need to cover, what is the theme of the presentation this year, how do we want to talk about, again, not only what have we done in the past year, but also what are our hopes and dreams for moving forward. And so the presentation has sort of, as it's coming to shape right now, has a high level theme, which we're still working on narrowing, but the theme is sort of emerging that what we think we want to be communicating to council is that it is past time for us to take some really bold and visionary action. We've done a lot of planning the last number of years as a city. We passed the comp plan, we passed the climate emergency, we did the transportation action plan. We have all of these really great policies and plans in place, and now it's really time to be implementing those and doing that quickly. So that's sort of the high level theme of the presentation. And the different sections, there's going to be some highlights of looking at highlighting some of the specific resolutions that we passed in the last year, talking a little bit about how did our committees continue to operate even with the switch to COVID and online last year, other committee milestones. One of the things we're exploring looking at is like a case study of a specific project and maybe missed opportunities for that project. And then talking about some of the sort of transformative change that we think needs to be happening at a city level based in a lot of the resolutions that the pedestrian and bicycle advisory committees have passed, not just in the last year, but in the last number of years. So I just wanted to give you all kind of a brief, like that high level overview and open it up to questions about either those themes in the presentation, any of the logistics, any other comments. I'll be working with Abigail to finalize like specific slides and presentation over the next couple of weeks, but really wanted to kind of let folks know high level some of the things that we are ideating on right now. Janice.
Okay, so I just wanted like you said, specifics. So if you referred to, it sounds like this is going to be a Zoom meeting as opposed to in person. Is that true?
Yes, it will still be.
And so how can we attend? Will you be sending out a link before the meeting, or do we just go to the city? How do we attend?
So, the LIMS link for the meeting is not up yet. I did check it right before this meeting, so they have this. It's on the calendar, but there's no link. My guess is that what will end up happening is that Matthew will get Abigail and I added as attendees, and then other folks will probably have to call in using the public number if you want to attend, but I am not sure on that because I haven't seen the link yet. Matthew, jump in.
Actually, Matthew, don't you usually before the meeting, you send a little email to the whole membership encouraging us to go? So that would be a context with telling us how to go.
Yep. And I'll send that email and everything, but the you will be able to see it like a full presentation like this, so it won't be a call in. It won't be a phone number. It'll be a link. So you'll be able to view the presentation just like you're viewing here today. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah. Plus, a piece, my part of it will be to kind of like provide a little bit of context of the past year and everything that we've dealt with, and the shift to remote, and just how all of that has gone, and then also just honoring members who have left. So we'll do that as well. And that's all I have.
Well, thanks, Matthew. Any other comments or questions right now? You all have my email and my phone number, so if you end up with other questions, Dan, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, hi there. So I've got open the Bike Advisory Committee 2020 CIP recommendations, and I'm assuming what you'll present is something, either similar to this or revising parts of this document.
Yeah, no, so I think that is for the next item on the agenda. I think
I'm sorry.
We're going to lead a discussion on the CIP process for this year. So we don't have like a completed PowerPoint deck for the TNPW presentation yet. I wanted to check in with the group and kind of give you some of that big picture framing before we got to a point where things were totally final. So if folks had questions or suggestions about what they would hope to see in the presentation, that you all had an opportunity to weigh in on that. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Well, thanks so much, Alyssa. And it's great that we do it with the PAC. I did not know that. So the only few times, like I've gone to a couple BAC meetings in the past, but it was like in 2012, and I think that was when it was like just BPAC. It was pedestrians included as well. So I remember those meetings. Cool. So Chris is up next on the CIP resolution prep.
I think I saw Cadence with a question.
Oh, Cadence.
Hi, sorry, I just didn't catch, what was the date of that presentation so that I can just put it in the notes?
Yeah, it's Wednesday, March 31st, currently scheduled for 1:30 p.m. And folks can also double check that on LIMS. And I'm sure, like Janice said, Matthew usually sends out a reminder a couple days beforehand. Like this meeting, it will be recorded and you can watch it on YouTube afterward if you miss it live.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Alyssa. So I'm going to jump into the CIP recommendations section of this and just give a little bit of background. And then really this is just meant to be a brainstorming session or the brainstorming session to figure out what you all want to highlight and put in here. So I'm going to start with last year's resolution, and throughout this, if you ever feel like I kind of like misrepresent the process from last year, or whoever was there, feel free to jump in and add context and color and stuff like that. So I'm not going to read this word for word. It was sent out in the agenda, and just for the sake of time, I just kind of want to start to dig in here. But essentially, last year we sort of switched gears a little bit from how things had previously been done, and kind of took a higher level look at a lot of this and focused really more on funding buckets. So as you can see in here, if you get to kind of the meat of this resolution, create and propose a capital budget request to fund neighborhood greenways. So really talking about creating a program here, as opposed to specifically calling out like a section of bikeway that you all wanted built or something like that. It was more about establishing a fund like this. I'll just say that the fund, this was not added to the CIP last year, and neighborhood greenways were included in our transportation action plan in a big way. So I think it makes a lot of sense personally just to keep that one in if that's something you all still want to prioritize. Creating and proposing a capital budget request to fund transit improvements. That also is not in the CIP that was passed most recently. Create and propose capital budget request to fund evaluation-based spot improvements and infrastructure adjustments to remedy gaps in recent capital projects. So I think this was, and if anyone wants to add context to this, I think this was about like, I think there was some frustration expressed of sometimes projects don't seem to be built as they were kind of brought forward to this committee, or it seems like maybe they were built slightly like wrong for whatever purpose was originally intended. And so being able to evaluate recently built infrastructure and go back and correct those things if possible. So that was another thing you all highlighted. Increasing funding amounts for some of our existing funding programs. So you listed off Safe Routes to School, our defective hazardous sidewalks, sidewalk gaps, pedestrian street lighting corridors, pedestrian safety program, and protected bikeways. So that's something that you all could include in here. Some of these have, I believe some of these were increased actually, partially due to like this resolution and your advocacy last year. I want to say, I know for sure, and Matthew, maybe jump in if you know, I know the ped safety program, I believe, was bumped up. I'm not as familiar with some of the other programs, but
I think so, but I don't recall off the top of my head how much.
And then one other thing, just kind of a hint from our CIP team is we also obviously with the passing of the Transportation Action Plan have kind of a new network that we propose to build in 10 years, an all ages and abilities network. And so it might be something to include that for like protected bikeways and or all ages and abilities network, making sure that we're funding that in an appropriate way to be able to complete that within 10 years. For the next 5 years, only implement reconstruction projects that include a design that represent significant improvements for walking, rolling, biking, and transit use. Consider safety-oriented street modifications that leave existing curb and gutter structures in place as a cost-effective option. Ensure that design guidelines for pavement infrastructure projects account for the mode shift goals outlined by the city's climate action plan. Ensuring that pavement projects that seek federal funds through the Met Council's regional solicitation process meet the above criteria, and construct all unprogrammed bike lanes identified in the protected bikeway plan on the city of Minneapolis streets. So that's where we're at from last year. I would probably recommend kind of using this format and just adjusting like what still feels right or what you want to cut out of here and what you want to prioritize. So that's primarily how I was thinking of going through this session today, is people just kind of speaking up, and if you like a certain part of this, or if you think there's too much or too little about a certain area, then now's the time to kind of make that known. And then ultimately at next month's full meeting, we would be ideally voting on a resolution as a group and passing that. Alyssa, I see you've got a question or a comment.
Muted again. I was just going to say, just to ground for folks, so this is a continuation of the discussion we started with Mike Samuelson at the last 5Es meeting, where he did sort of an overview of what is the budget process. This is like where the Bicycle Advisory Committee weighs in on what we think Public Works should propose as part of the capital budget process, before that ends up going to the Capital Long Range Improvements Committee and the mayor and the council and stuff. So it sounds like this is our sort of working touch point between that initial conversation with Mike, and then he's still coming back to a future meeting, or is that not true? He had mentioned he was planning on returning.
Yeah, so when he'll come back in the process is after this resolution would likely be passed, and more of kind of a report back of what they what and why they took or didn't take from the resolution. That said, if there's any questions that like for him or anything you kind of want to feedback on, I can definitely be the intermediary and take questions from today or if there's like, for some reason you think there's a need to have him like in the room as we're passing the resolution to like clarify stuff at the next full meeting, I can definitely talk to him, and I would think he'd be open to that as well. But likely he would be coming back to this subcommittee to kind of talk through everything at next month's subcommittee. And thanks for that context, Alyssa. Dan?
Yes, this is going to be a little free flowing, but I'll try here. So your line item that says increase proposed funding amounts for pedestrian, bicycle safety, bicycle specific capital programs, including safe routes to school, etc. I am wondering if we could add to this or a separate bullet point to talk about considering complete streets improvements to asphalt repaving projects and parkway repaving projects. I'll tell you why I don't know the exact language of this. As you know, or may not know, Theodorworth Parkway was repaved last year. It's a rare occasion that happens. I don't know, it's probably over 20 years, so it's the last time anybody's going to look at it for another long period of time. And I had talked with the project manager in the parks about the possibility of enhancing basically the 26th Avenue intersection, so you had a pedestrian crossing sign and perhaps a zebra crossing, and receive the standard reasons why we don't do that, and we'll take it under consideration, da 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 da. But the reality of it is that Theodorworth Parkway, there's 4 intersections there that you could also include. Plymouth, which is going through a reconstruction this year down there to get to Theodorworth Park, McNair, 26th and 29th. And, you know, all you got to do to look at a real tough thing to look at, and you could do this very easily, would be to take a count, you should have it in your city records, the amount of pedestrian enhancements that go around the south end of the Grand Rounds compared to the north end of the Grand Rounds. And it's astounding. I will just tell you, it's astounding. And I just think that there's no way to really get at projects that are going on now that are basically putting a new coat of asphalt down and not thinking anything about how you get across these streets or through them. And so that's my comment. I don't know where to take it from there.
Can you reiterate like the first kind of bullet that you said of like what you would want to include in this?
Well, I'm thinking about programs that have typically not gone before the BAC or the PAC, and the 2 big ones that I think of are asphalt repaving and the parkway repaving. These are set amounts that go for street repair, but there's just I don't think there's a whole lot of consideration given to complete streets, and I don't think there will be unless there's some kind of understanding that they should pass these projects through a few different eyes.
And are you suggesting that like the funding amounts should change for that, or just rather the way, like when we use money for those things, that we kind of approach those projects differently?
I think that we approach them in a complete streets format rather than to just basically redo what was there.
Yeah, so one thing, I'm not quite sure if the CIP, if I'm understanding correctly, I'm not quite sure if the CIP is necessarily the right place for that, because the CIP doesn't necessarily say exactly like what a street would look like for a program like that. If you wanted to say like use more or less of that.
It's a program. There are 2 programs that are funded every year, and they come before CLIC. And I'm just saying that within those programs, there should be a review point that maybe, we can discuss some possibilities of some improvements that involve pedestrians and bicyclists. At least they're sort of aware of it, because there's no vehicle to do that right now. There's just nothing.
Okay.
So it sounds like you're, from the perspective of the capital improvement program, it sounds like you're talking about changing the scope of improvements of the program to expand it to include more options, right? At least that's what it sounds like the suggestion is.
I think it's for the programs themselves that just typically we don't have any review of, and there's no way to basically communicate change that's about the transportation action plan. It's, and some of those changes are pretty simple and pretty easy. You're not talking about a lot of money when you're talking about putting up a sign and, being able to add a few enhancements like I experienced this summer with Theodorworth Parkway. I just think there's just no way to get these types of spot improvements that get any traction. I think asphalt repaving happens every year, and there's a set amount that's given to it, and they go after certain streets, and the same with the parkways. And it'd be a great vehicle to see what goals they're accomplishing with that, besides just adding another layer of asphalt.
Cool, thanks. I added some language about basically adding flexibility to those programs to be able to do some of the kind of spot treatments and stuff. So thanks. Philip, I see you've got a hand raised.
Yeah, my comment is sort of a neighborhood input CIP process along the line of that Dan was saying, and I'm thinking of how it's really common for neighbors, the first time they hear about a mill and overlay in front of their street, which of course they're going to get assessed for, the first they hear of it is it's going to happen. And I've seen it in Ward 2, and I've also seen park improvements where, sort of simple things are missed. I mean, in just thinking about my house, bicycles and walkers, many more than cars, coming up 38th Avenue, and the repaving, there was no attention given to the cars as they come out of the tunnel and they drop into the street. There was just no safety elements there, or the park that failed to put a sidewalk connecting Dorman to Seabury, which is a very well used, and now bicyclists are always just going through the park on the grass. So that, I don't know, I think where I would land is, but again, it's maybe really beyond the scope of something we BSC would recommend, but it's really the CIP process for capital improvements. It doesn't touch base with, and I'm thinking of neighborhood associations because they're in the they're closest to the customer, and we rarely have neighborhood groups are just not aware of the 1 to 5 to 10 year rolling plan for mill and overlay and simple opportunities there. So it's kind of a rambly. It's maybe.
So is that more about like engagement? Like
it's really engaged
around the CIP process. I think that's something that we can definitely kind of relay onto our CIP team and possibly include in here. I will point out one thing specifically about neighborhood groups. The city has released some stuff of kind of digging into neighborhood groups and who neighborhood groups represent. And I'll just say, like, simply only adding neighborhood groups as a point of contact in here, I think probably wouldn't be the direction that the city would go, just because we know those groups are more likely to represent homeowners, white people. I'm not sure some of the other kind of disproportionate representation. But that said, I think like something about like just general public engagement and like transparency may be a piece of something, of something to kind of add. I saw a hand from Alyssa and Bree go up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm reminded of the conversation that happened at the Capital Long Range Improvements Committee last year, wherein the committee encouraged the city to explore like elements of participatory budgeting. And so we could potentially look at that recommendation for some guidance for a comment if that's the direction we want to go as far as public input. And then, yeah, I definitely agree, Chris, with what you're saying around, neighborhood groups. I think engagement for engagement's sake, when the city has so many very clear policies about the direction we need to go, you don't want to be doing engagement where you have a foregone conclusion. You want to be engaging people at a point in the process where there is possibility to influence things, because that is so much about why people get frustrated with public participation processes as they are, is sort of the engagement happens too late. And so I think that participatory budgeting process is early enough in the process that you are engaging people at a point that they would be able to have an impact if we did participatory budgeting as a city.
Cool. Thank you. I got that down. Bree?
Yeah, I would like to add to defund the MPD. I feel like just reading over the BAC resolution, it's like nitpicking, substantial amounts of money, but like compared with what the city is currently prioritizing, I feel like we shouldn't have to be nickel and diming streets, which everyone uses, because we have an inflated budget for a police department. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Cool, thanks. I've got that. And also, like, if there's any reactions to that one or the participatory budgeting one, like I feel like it would, in a non-virtual room, it might be a little more discussion oriented. But I do want to encourage that. Like this is a brainstorm, so like I want to put everything out, but also ultimately the BAC will need to vote on these. So here, if people have certain responses to any of these options.
I'd be interested to talk through a little bit more about the defund MPD, and whether you all, the group, wants to have that in there. And I guess part of the reason I say that, take away the specific statement, defund the MPD, and just for a second, if that's okay, but Public Works, like we have no control outside of the capital side of the budget, I guess, in this context. And I guess I know there's a lot of conversation around defund MPD, but I guess I just want to talk through that we don't have control over that through the CIP process. And so I'm curious, maybe if we could talk more about why we would put that in the CIP recommendation, and if that's the right spot, or I guess maybe just talk more about that a little bit.
I'm just going to jump in with some information. So I think the capital improvements process, right, is like, it is about the 20% of the budget that is capital. And so if we're going to comment on, if something is going within our comment on CIP, it probably, thinking about who the audience for this comment is, I think it does have to be capital related. That said, I think that there are lots of there are capital expenses. One of the proposed CBRs last year was for constructing a new police station, which was several $1 million. I can't remember the number off the top of my head. So thinking about, if we are going to comment on that within the CIP, that it's appropriate to keep that to the capital expenses, because this is not a budget-wide comment. And also, we have made comments on the entire operations of city budget before, and definitely would anticipate us doing that again. Last year, I think the process was, the whole budget process was super wonky and on strange timeframes, and sort of didn't go anywhere for a long time, and then was very, very smashed together because of COVID and all the restrictions from the clerk's office. So would definitely want to see whatever opinions we have about the operations side of the budget passed in a resolution about the entire budget. So that, I think that's just some information about the distinctions between where we're at in the budget process as far as capital, and then when do we when we could definitely weigh in on the entire budget earlier. We've typically left that until later. But I think there's like two separate things there. So hopefully that information helps provide a little bit of like, what is the scope of the CIP? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, that's helpful. But yeah, I was thinking about like, there are capital expenses for the MPD.
Sure.
And then also, yeah, with overall budget, just to keep in mind, like it was interesting. So I just, I guess almost a year ago, graduated from the Humphreys. It's been so long, I don't even remember what it's called. A Master of Public Affairs, and I was really lucky enough to study abroad in China and in the Netherlands, and it was just really, they're very different cultures and countries. However, it never seemed like money was an issue ever. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, we could live in a world where like you wouldn't have to worry about money for transportation. Like it was like, oh, we need to do that to save lives. Okay, we'll do that. Or we need this to like make our city better. And yeah, I think to kind of keep that in mind, to see a budget that actually reflects our city's values in a more community-based way.
I'll just say as a follow-up, I appreciate the context around that, and think it makes sense to add that language, in the context part of a resolution, and then also thinking about, capital versus the city's overall budget. That makes sense. So thank you.
Matthew?
Did Matthew Hendricks raise his hand, or were you talking
Matthew
to
Hendricks, I
Okay.
see. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I was muted. So one thread that might tie some of the last several comments together might be to say that what we really want is for the council to fund the transportation action plan, because the plan, I think, does a great job of laying out some of the improvements that could be made over the next decade, and it's already been adopted, and so to fund that, I think, is a logical next step, and I think that is also in line with the way Alyssa summarized the year-end report to say it's time for the city to take some bold steps forward. So that'd be maybe one way to sort of describe the funding request that we have in mind.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And I do just want to let people know, like our staff have already been kind of combing through the transportation action plan. Since it was unconstrained fiscally, they've gone through and like have an idea of what those different things mean. So I just want to back up that I think a broad thing like this will make sense to the folks who are actually working on the CIP, because they've done some of the digging into like the more specifics of what a broad statement like that would mean.
And Chris, do you have any recommendations or even just some background context in terms of whether it would make sense for us to target a number per year, or is it better to leave it as a program?
In terms of?
Like if we were to say we really want to fund the vision that's laid out in the transportation action plan.
I would say it as like a broad, if I was going to do it, I would say it as a broad statement. Say first fund the transportation action plan, and you could say something about like the capital piece of that. But then I would also personally specifically call out like ensure that there's enough funding to build out the AAA, the All Ages and Abilities network within 10 years, and ensure there's enough funding to build the neighborhood greenways that are proposed within 10 years. I don't think that you need to break that down any further by mileage or anything like that, because I think that would be detail that our team would have. Like they would be able to figure out what those numbers are, what the money is behind it to actually achieve that.
That sounds good to me. So Chris, is that something you're comfortable adding to the text that you're working on? Maybe you're already doing it.
Yeah, sorry, I muted myself. Yes, I will do that right now and share.
And while you're typing, I just wanted to say I really appreciated, Bree, your international context and that sense that where there's a will, there's a way, and when the political will is there to make streets safer, it's feasible, it can happen. And I think that's great, great context.
Cool, thanks, Matthew. So I do want to take just a couple minutes, and I know we have one more item, and I don't want to push us too far over, but this is kind of the last thing before resolution for this. So I'm wondering if anyone has any strong feelings about, like, if there's anything in this top part from last year that people feel strongly about removing, or if you all think, like, keeping anything basically that wasn't accepted in the CIP last year, just keeping that in the resolution and adding kind of the new priorities is the way to go, or if there's any feedback on that.
Chris, this is Alyssa. I don't have feedback on that. I would defer to the committee chairs, but I will let the committee chairs know that as the primary drafter of this last year, I would be happy to do the digging into the numbers if we need updated numbers on the 2021 through 2026 CBRs and what happened there. So if folks need that, let me know.
Thanks, Alyssa.
Yeah, Chris, this is Heather. I would just say, hold on. I would just say that making sure that part at the top is updated to reflect the current environment. I wouldn't say we necessarily need to remove anything from it, but we may want to just be a little bit more present and make sure that our numbers are right.
Thank you. Oh, Dan.
Yeah, this is just something to check. Maybe Alyssa can help me with this, but I think what you're going to be looking for is instead of the 2021-2025 numbers in there, I think they're 2022 to 2028. That has gone to a 6-year system instead of or is it 5 years, Melissa or Alyssa?
It's 6 years, but I think that's 22, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's a 2022 to 2027 CBR cycle.
Cool, thanks. Cool. All right, I think that we're in a good place for this. I'll coordinate some of the kind of cleaning up, and thanks again, Alyssa, for offering some of that, and just do some other coordination with the exec team and figure out exactly how everything will work at the full committee. So thanks, everyone.
Awesome. So we have 4 minutes to be on time. The next thing up is what Robin mentioned in the full meeting about parking minimums and travel demand management. So go for it, Robin.
Yeah, and so you think it's 5 minutes until the meeting is over? Is that what I'm hearing, Bree?
Yeah, I mean, if it was over on time.
Okay, so I actually have Joe Bernard here from CPED with me, and I think we could maybe try to breeze through his presentation about as quickly as we can. Not necessarily with the intent of finishing the discussion today, but just starting it, and then we can talk more at the next meeting.
Sounds good. And if anyone needs to leave, at 5:30, that is fine. Cadence is being really great in taking notes, and we have the presentation link as well. Thanks, Robin.
Great. All right, take it away, Joe.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I think the last time we spoke, I brought this item back in September, and you all offered some really useful comments. At this point, we're scheduled to hopefully bring this item forward to the Planning Commission for a public hearing on March 22nd. There's a decent chance that that gets delayed a cycle, but that's what we're shooting for. And then the City Council would consider this at the end of April. The changes that we're talking about are changes to our zoning ordinance related to parking requirements and to our travel demand management ordinance. The changes are really intended to implement some specific policies that are called out in Minneapolis 2040 and in the Transportation Action Plan. Like Robin said, I'm going to breeze through this today and try and focus on a couple of things that maybe this group is more interested in. But I think there's at least one or two folks on the committee that are going to attend a meeting this Thursday where we're going to go into much greater detail on this information, and I'm sure they can report back at that time. So the biggest and simplest change that we're proposing is that parking will no longer be required of any use in the city. Of course, uses will still provide parking, but we're not going to require it anymore. And the reason for that is we want to reduce, we know that eliminating parking requirements reduces housing costs. It gets people out of cars. We use land more efficiently. We're going to support walking and biking in transit. As well as a few other positive outcomes. We're also going to reduce the maximum parking that you're allowed to build on a given property. The biggest change here to look out for is that we currently have a maximum for residential uses only downtown of 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit. That requirement will now be applied in more spaces or more places throughout the city. And then there will be a maximum of 2 spaces per dwelling unit allowed in all areas outside of downtown and our transit supportive locations. To give you a sense of what that change looks like, today this project is Planned Parenthood. Uptown was approved a couple of years ago. It's a 29,000 square foot building. They provided 69 parking spaces. The current zoning code would allow them to build 145 spaces. And now I can't imagine seeing 145 parking spaces attached to a building this size, but it would be allowed today. So we're ratcheting that number down to a few different tiers. We'll also be limiting surface parking throughout the city. You no longer can just have as much as you want in addition to the maximums we're instituting. Electric vehicle charging is going to be a requirement of parking spaces in the future. At least 10% of spaces, most uses throughout the city will require 10% of the spaces to have EV charging stations installed. And we'll have a standard for EV readiness as well for most other spaces in development. As far as bicycle parking and facilities are concerned, we're looking at increasing some of those, some of them significantly. Residential requirement today is to have 1 space for every 2 dwelling units in a development. And with the exception of around the university area, there's a special zoning district that requires you to have 1 bike parking space for every bedroom in your development. That 1 per bedroom requirement near the university is not changing. However, we are increasing the residential bike parking requirement to 1 space per 1 dwelling unit. Currently, we have bike parking requirements for a fair number of commercial uses, but not all of them. We'll be expanding our bike parking requirements to all commercial uses and a number of other uses in the zoning code as well. So to open a business in Minneapolis, you're more than likely going to, after this amendment, need to supply at least 3 temporary, or I should say short-term parking spaces out front. The biggest change that's coming forward here in this regard is we have bicycle parking, shower, and locker facilities currently downtown for buildings of 500,000 square feet or greater. Our proposal at this point is that we would require bike parking, shower, and locker facilities citywide on projects greater than 200,000 square feet. Now that's in addition to, we still will require bike parking for smaller businesses, but these are unique circumstances where the facilities would be really high quality. And we'll require those at a higher rate. So just to give a sense of what that change looks like, currently for a 500,000 square foot building, which is huge, we haven't had more than a half a dozen of those built in the city in the last 20 years. The current requirement in our ordinance for that size of a building is to have 30 long-term bike parking spaces, 4 showers, and 15 full-size lockers. The changes that we're proposing for this ordinance for a building of that size moving forward, they would have to supply 250 long-term bike parking spaces, a minimum of 8 showers, and 100 lockers. So to give you a sense of what size building that is, that's like the Gateway building under construction at Nicollet and Washington right now is over 500,000 square feet. So they would have a requirement similar to this. Oh, I have an example in here. City's public service building. Current standard in this size building, 25 spaces. Proposed standard would be 189. The city is supplying 261 in the development. We're also proposing some changes to our loading ordinance. This is in the zoning code. It's loading requirements are intended to make sure that we have spaces on property for delivery vehicles to get supplies to businesses and to residences. We would like to reduce some of the loading requirements for our lower intensity uses, especially uses like a grocery store where we want them to locate in more places throughout the city, some places that are maybe more challenging to locate because of our current loading requirements. And we're intending to increase some flexibility in those requirements by allowing developments to negotiate their loading requirements through our travel demand management ordinance. Well, this is kind of a niche issue. I don't think we need to cover this one here. The UA overlay has some unique parking requirements that we're going to try and since they're going away, we'll address them with some changes there. The other major change here to our ordinance is in the travel demand management section. Currently, our travel demand management ordinance is not very specific, and it applies to very few developments by ordinance. It only applies to non-residential development over 100,000 square feet. And we do have public works staff and planning staff. We do call for some discretionary TDMs for other developments, but it's not a consistent process. So we're looking to standardize that process and to shift our focus away from traffic studies in our travel demand management program and to focus more on achieving the desired outcome of shifting our mode split and in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. So moving forward, we're going to apply this requirement to all projects with more than 50 dwelling units or greater than 25,000 square feet. And there will be a tiered system where smaller projects can comply without going through and creating an engineering report. And I'm sorry if this is kind of inside baseball, but I think this is important to understand some of these details before we talk about what it looks like on the ground. The major, we'll have this process tiered between minor and major based on the size of your development. A major TDM will require you to do more things to comply with our ordinance. And you're going to comply with our ordinance by providing any number of items from a list. This list is not yet comprehensive. We are considering adding more things, changing the points that you're awarded. But to give a few examples here, well, I'll just read down through these. The intent here is to ask developers to do items that will have the most direct impact on achieving greenhouse gas emission reductions and getting people out of their cars. So the top two things we're trying to incentivize here are developments that promise and deliver a transit fare subsidy and developments that provide zero parking. If developments aren't able to deliver that, they're going to have to do a higher number of other elements from this list to comply with our ordinance. So those other things are providing limited parking, doing pedestrian realm improvements, increasing the number of shower, locker, and long-term bicycle storage that you beyond what you're required otherwise in the ordinance. We're hoping to really encourage people to do some curbside demand solution improvements. So on-street pickup and drop off for some uses, and allowing for deliveries in some cases curbside. Valet parking is always something that's been encouraged in our TDM plans as well for some of our busier uses, in particular downtown. We're going to continue to incentivize shared vehicles, maintenance agreements, and the posting of real-time transit info. And we're also just allowing for some flexibility in our ordinance by allowing developers to propose additional ways to comply. So to give you a sense of the scale of the projects we're talking about that will be required to go through this process, these two projects were approved within the last year or two and do not meet our thresholds for triggering these requirements, seeing as they're relatively small. And I'm not going to run through all these examples, but to just give you a sense, this is a project on Nicollet near I-94 that supplied 62 parking spaces and 82 bike parking spaces. It's not clear how they would have complied with our proposed ordinance, so they would have had to do something above and beyond what they already proposed to do. Same here with the previous example of Planned Parenthood. Not clear how they would have met these requirements. So the point here is that we're raising the bar, I think, for development moving forward to make sure that they really are contributing in a way to our built environment that helps us achieve our mode split goals. With that, I think I will just pause and ask if there are any questions or anything in particular folks would like to discuss.
Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, thanks. My question is about district parking. My experience in a number of cities around the state is that I think I've always seen the total number of parking spaces decrease when a district parking scheme is implemented. So the question is, is there a proposed policy around district parking? And then sort of the follow-on comment is that it seems absolutely essential to have sort of model legal agreements so that property owners can sell properties on the secondary market. It feels like the killer usually for a property owner that wants to participate in district parking is that they don't have a legally sort of firm enough agreement that conforms to what the secondary market, real estate market will accept. So is there in proposed district parking, and the question about just sort of model legal agreements, which is separate than policy.
I have a question. What is district parking? Whatever. Sorry.
Oh, well, it would be where instead of 3 property owners all putting up their own parking, 2 of them may say, I will have no parking on my property, but I will enter into a legal agreement with a 3rd property and we'll put the parking there. And I like the limitation of the maximum size of 100 parking spaces. So that keeps from obviously having these massive surface parking lots specifically.
Sure. So a couple of thoughts. One is that the ordinance that we currently have, there's a huge section on shared parking and how you figure that out from a required parking perspective. That all goes away with our new ordinance because we're not requiring any parking. So if you want to share parking with a group of business owners, the city doesn't need to be involved in figuring out whether or not you have enough. That being said, there are a couple of things to still watch out for. One is that we're still not going to permit as of right if you have parking on a residential property. A commercial business is not going to be able to use that parking because we want to make sure that the coming and going of vehicles is the activity is consistent with the use for the site. The last thing is more of just a that I can share is more of just a philosophy that we've taken with this issue of secondary market for parking in the zoning ordinance is that there are provisions to discourage and even prohibit the leasing of spaces to folks who aren't using the parking on the site for the purpose of visiting that site. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason here is that if we don't have some sort of regulation like that, it opens the doors to folks building parking specifically for the purpose of selling it to someone else. And we want to avoid that outcome. But shared parking is something that we love to see, and for the most part, the zoning ordinance is now going to be silent on that. So
okay. Mm-hmm.
So maybe I could say just a little bit more about that, Philip. One of the things that we're very interested in is and I've been looking through the comp plan to see if I can find it because I know we made this change. But basically, it's the idea of like coupon parking in a residential area. So right now we have these critical parking areas that where it says like you can only park here for an hour. You can't park here at all unless you have the thing that says that you live there. And one of the things that they've tried in other places that I don't think this is the right ordinance to address or the right way to do it, but we could do it as part of our like curbside management work that Public Works is working on, is to establish these broader areas where it's not a parking meter kind of a thing, but where there is some sort of a fee. And so it's not the same exact kind of district parking that you're talking about, where it's like centralized lots or ramps that are being shared by commercial users, but it's more like treating a lot of the on-street parking in a given area like district parking.
Totally,
and actually taking some of that money. I mean, one of the promises of that is if folks are paying for that, then we can take that money and we can put it into pedestrian improvements and into greening and into bike improvements and that kind of thing.
Yeah, but again, bus passes. I mean, there are lots of ways. If exactly. That's a great idea. Yeah.
But that's more about the way that we deal with our curbside stuff that we control.
Yeah, curb management, I agree, is separate than district parking. But I mean, I've even for curb management, I mean, it's mostly theoretical, but you can even have You can even have auctions, and you can have maximums and minimums, and you can take the money raised, and it can be giving bus passes to people. It can be paying for bicycles. I mean, you can do a lot of creative market-based things.
Yeah.
Another discussion. Thanks, Raymond.
Go ahead, Alyssa.
Thanks. So I guess one question and one comment. Joe, you gave us a lot of really great examples of kind of before and after, but I think it's hard for me to get a sense of, are we going to be meeting all of our mode split goal? Like, are we going to be providing enough bike parking that every building that that undergoes a TDM review has enough bike parking to meet the mode split goal for bicycling that's in like the Transportation Action Plan and Minneapolis 2040? So I guess that's the question. And then the other comment that I've made in a number of spaces is sort of the intersection between like public placemaking and this. So we think about vehicle parking, we think about where we're going to put scooters, we think about where we're going to put bikes. And I don't know that this conversation includes benches for people walking. And like, that is the closest thing that we can think of as like for like parking for people who walk. But just would be interested in kind of continuing to push us in that direction of also thinking about what does it look like to have facilities for people who are walking to rest. And I think that sort of gets subsumed into the public placemaking conversation, but it actually is part of this. Like, if we want people to walk places to a restaurant or to a shop and wait for a friend, right, they're going to need a place to sit. So just thinking about that also, I know that we are not the pedestrian advisory committee, so there might be things in the ordinance that we just didn't cover today, but just wanted to raise that up as well.
It is part of what's being conceived as part of the TDM points system, right, Joe?
So there's one of the standards in the TDM point system is pedestrian realm improvements. We get really cautious about being specific about the improvements that we would call for in those situations when it's so often site specific. So in the case of benches, for example, love to see more benches outside of development, but there's this shaky, I don't want to say it's shaky legal ground, but we can't necessarily require that developers improve the public right-of-way. We can incentivize it. And so how we do that is really important. I think what we can do to address that question is to include that in the list of options that we would negotiate when a developer proposes to meet the standard of public realm improvement. In terms of bicycle spaces, the number of bicycle spaces in development, and whether or not we know it's going to be enough to meet to support the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and achieving our mode split goals. I think, and I know you're familiar with this, and others maybe too, that the TDM process as it is today, and the engineering firms who work on TDMs, it's an inexact science, and we're leaning towards we'd rather have a static requirement, either per use, so minimum number of spaces per year use, or a minimum requirement based on the gross floor area of the building, so a rate-based number, and to set expectations at least a minimum level. Many of these very large projects will still have to go through the traditional TDM process of having an engineering report and a traffic study. And there's still room for negotiation to talk about what is the appropriate level of bike parking for some of these situations. But we would, I guess, long answer, even longer, is that we would prefer to have not negotiate that on a case-by-case basis and have a static requirement for most uses. And have that requirement outside of the TDM process as well.
Well, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Joe and Robin.
Yeah.
What are the next steps that you need from us then?
So I'm thinking that maybe let's have more of a discussion about this at our next meeting and aim for having something pass the full BAC in April. I think that'll be about the right timing to affect as it goes through the Planning Commission and the council. And in the meantime, at least Alyssa is on the at this meeting next Thursday where we can sort of dig in a little bit more. But so I can work with her and others to try to come up with something that would be something for us to look at as a motion for next time.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for staying longer, and thanks, Joe, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think that's it. First meeting for me in the books.
Nice job,
Nice.
Bree.
Yeah.
Yay!
Nice.
Good job, Bree.
Deanna,
Yeah, I just wanted to, I've just put in the chat a link to an article that appeared in MinPost today by Bill Lindeke. It's an article on Robin Hutchinson's era, and it's a nice light read that I think is worth just taking a look at. So if you get a chance, take a look.
Oh, I didn't know she was leaving. Cool.
She's in the Biden administration now.
Yes, she's gone. She's not leaving. She left already.
I have an announcement on this. There is a group of advocates putting together a letter asking the mayor to engage in a national search process for the next director of public works. That will probably be going public in the next week or so, and will probably be posted on all the usual advocacy spots. But we'll be encouraging folks in the public to sign on to that. So keep an eye out.
It's important stuff because that has not been the normal practice for this administration to do national searches for this kind of stuff. So I think having advocates out there making clear that we do need that. We need someone of Robin Hutchinson's caliber. Nothing against Brett, nothing against anybody in public works right now, but like we had a serious national leader as our public works director, and we made a lot of progress because of that, and we need to continue that leadership.
Thanks, everyone. See you at the next meeting.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks,
Good night.
Bree. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.